and do this in memory of Al Warden. Al Warden was an American test pilot, engineer at NASA, who was the command modular pilot for the Apollo 15 lunar mission in 1971. One of the only 24 people to have flown to the moon. He orbited it 74 times in the command module endeavor. He was born in February in 1932 in Jackson, Michigan, and he died just recently, March 18th, 2020, in Sugar Land, Texas.
Now back to Talking Tunes.
Talking Tunes, a few years ago, I had the honor to follow Al Warden around with my camera and microphone. And we went to a couple different places, a couple different interviews. It was the astronaut commander of the Apollo 15, Al Warden. Here's interview number 1 with John Van Wyck and Al Warden on Talking Tunes.
And we'd like to welcome to our studio the distinguished astronaut commander of Apollo 15, Al Warden. Al, welcome.
Thank you much. Nice to be here.
Great to have you.
Yeah, got a great day too.
Oh, it's a beautiful day.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful.
Why
day.
are we inside? Well, we should be out playing golf somewhere.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Let's go.
Or boating. Something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And you spend summers over the Grand Rapids area.
We do. Our permanent home's in Florida.
Okay.
We live in a little town called Vero Beach in the east coast of Florida. But some years ago, I was employed by B.F. Goodrich, the old tire company, which had converted to aviation products.
Okay.
They sold the tire company, and they had a company down here in Grand Rapids at the airport called Jet Electronics and Technology, which is now L3.
Okay.
And back in the early '90s, I had and a partner had kind of invented and developed a stall warning system for aircraft, and we sold the license to B.F. Goodrich, and they turned around and asked me to come and run the company that was going to develop it.
Excellent. Cool.
So I came up here and for years ran Jet Electronics out at the airport. That kind of got us into Grand Rapids. We built a house at the time, and our daughter came up to visit us, met a guy in Grand Rapids, and lo and behold, she married a Dutchman, and they live in tough. And they live in East Grand, and they've got 2 kids. And about 10 years ago, my wife and I decided that we needed to have a place here so she could see the grandkids.
Oh yeah.
So we see them a lot.
And you know yourself, getting out of Florida in the summertime is not a bad idea.
No. Florida's a good place to be away from in the summertime, and we figured Michigan's the same way in the wintertime.
In the wintertime,
we got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You're an official snowbird.
Yeah, we are officially snowbirds. Yeah.
So Al, let's. I have a burning question in my mind.
Sure.
And
I can see it.
reading a little bit about you, you have the distinction of being the most isolated human being in the history of mankind.
It's a little bit of a misnomer.
Is it really?
But it's in the Guinness Book of World Records, so I'll take it. I don't mind.
If it's in the Guinness World,
I think
that's
that's because I was probably further away from the guys on the surface than
and you
anybody
were,
else.
yeah,
And I don't know that I was any further away from Earth than anybody else, but I was further away from the guys on the surface. So I got that. I got that record.
Well, I guess the distinction is, I mean, I guess the record is that the 2 guys that were on the moon, and you went out into fairly. Explain when you're in orbit of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Once you drop those guys off and they went down in the landing
best part of the flight,
landing module,
guys,
then the command module actually floated to a higher orbit. Outside.
I put it in a higher orbit. We had a very tricky flight plan. Our landing site was 28 degrees north of the lunar equator, and nobody had been up that high. All the flights before ours had gone into a band of about plus or minus 10 degrees from the lunar equator, because we knew the gravitational forces there.
right.
We didn't know them at 28 degrees north, and we picked that landing site because there's some features we wanted to really look at. It turns out that we didn't know the gravitational forces very well, and it did affect our trajectory. I put us into an orbit that was 60 miles high behind the moon and about 50,000 feet high over the landing site. And that would mean that they used less fuel to get down the surface.
Okay.
Right? And they had to fly over a mountain, which was 15,000 feet high. So basically, we're 35,000 feet over the mountain. And that was the night before the landing. We went to bed that night, got up the next morning, and I'm flying this thing, of course, and I looked out the window and I saw the mountain, and I was looking up at it, and I thought, oh my gosh, we got a problem here. So I called Houston, and then Houston came right back and he said, gee, we're glad you called because you're getting pretty close to the mountain. So I said, well, how close are we? They said, well, we have your at altitude now over the moon's surface of 31,000 feet, plus or minus 9. Now, I swear to God, anybody who's an engineer and knows their math or knows anything else, when a guy puts a plus or minus something on a number like that,
they have no idea.
He's got no idea what he's talking about.
No clue what's going on.
So you take 31,000, you subtract 9 from that down to 22,000 feet, and the top of that mountain was 15. So we went over to about 7,000 feet, and you better believe we got ready very quickly for Dave and Jim to go down to the lunar surface because we didn't want to fool with that one anymore. Oh, so they did go down, but what happened? I dropped them off, and then on the backside of the moon at the high point, I added some velocity, which brought my orbit up to 60 miles around the moon. So I was 60 miles, basically 60 miles around above the moon.
That's really interesting stuff. I grew up with all of the programs, watching them intensely on the TV and all of the Apollo programs.
Was that color TV, John?
Yes, it was, Nick. Thank you very much.
We're talking old times now.
I wasn't saying.
Yeah, I know. You young people, you smart Alex. They got everything going.
Maybe when Shepard and Grissom and those guys went up in Mercury, no, it might have been a black and white TV. But
those were pretty exciting days.
But, I guess maybe this is the first time I've heard an explanation of you out there flying this craft.
Right.
Yeah, pretty much, maybe in my own mind, I'm saying, it's supposed to be all pre-programmed and everything is all pre-programmed. But once you got up there, you were literally flying that ship.
Well,
making those
any changes to your trajectory you have to do on board. See, our program is very different from the Russian program. The Russian program, they control everything from the ground.
Okay.
Our program, the ground can tell us what to do, but we have to do it on board. Everything is just like an airplane.
Yeah.
You got to fly it, sitting in the seat and hitting the throttle or the control stick or whatever. You got to do that on board. So the ground could tell us what to do, but we had to make all the trajectory changes in flight, as a crew on board. And you're right. There are some program types. Our flight plan was pretty detailed.
Yeah,
it went second by second. It was just every second was programmed. And there were certain times in the flight plan where we made where if we needed to, we could make a trajectory change. Their tracking of the spacecraft shows that we're going to be 100 miles above the moon when we go around it instead of 60. Then we make a little mid-course correction to fix that. And so there were some program times to do that. And all of the maneuvers that we did were calculated on the ground. I mean, so many feet per second that I had to add to the spacecraft, they would tell me what attitude to be in and all that.
Cool.
So, kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that the equipment we carried on board to do all that was all invented and designed and developed back in the 50s. It was pretty old stuff.
Really?
I have to tell you about the computer on board. I mean, this is kind of amazing what we were able to do. We had a computer on board that was hand wired. It was all hardcore stuff. You could drop it, you could juice it, you could do anything, and it kept on working. The problem with it was that we had a total memory, programmable memory. Get this now, total programmable memory of 75K. Now I got more than that in my watch.
Right.
Today. Yeah. So that's how far we've come since those days. But I got to tell you, that thing worked flawlessly through the flight.
That's good.
We didn't have enough capacity. We had to leave one program out of the suite of programs we had in the computer. We had to leave one program out, and that was called Return to Earth. And I thought, oh my gosh, one program. If something happens out there, we got a problem. We don't have that program. We didn't need it, but
Yeah. And Al, I mean, you actually brought up an interesting subject. The technology that was developed because of NASA. A lot of people have said to me, why do we need to fund things like NASA and everything else? And I said, you realize that, there's so many things in modern day life. We go back to the Seinfeld writing upside down with a pen.
Right.
I mean, those kinds of things that people. I mean, if you were to talk about how many inventions, literally, that are commonplace today, how many of them are there? I mean, there's
Well,
thousands,
what's interesting about all that to me is that back in the 50s, the military, through DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Products Agency, started the development of what we now call silicon chips,
right.
which has allowed us to solidify all of our electronic circuits into microcircuits and
Right.
boards and that kind of thing. And that is, in my opinion, that is the start of almost everything that we see today. We can't move without silicon chips or cell phones. I mean, that's an example that everybody knows.
Oh, yeah.
How in the world can you make a telephone that's completely independent of power? You can call anywhere in the world on it, and it's small. You can hold it in your hand. Now, how in the world is that? Well, that's because of silicon chips and all that development from 50 years, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And people lose sight of the fact that the space program is really the greatest technology generator this country's ever had.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kept us ahead of the rest of the world for 40 years now.
Right.
Yeah.
And my concern, and the concern of a lot of guys that I know in the program, is that now that this wonderful president we have, God rest his soul,
Very.
Moving
he
right
is
along.
he's kind of shutting down the program and trying to slide that money into the private sector. In the private sector, I have no problem with for Earth orbit, but they can't go to Mars. I mean, you're never going to get a company to fly a mission to Mars because there's no profit in it.
Yeah.
So why would they do it? So that's a government function. But with him shutting down a lot of this program and stretching it out, the motivation to develop technology is kind of drifting away. And I'm very concerned about what that's going to do to the country in the future. I think that technology, and I'll tell you another thing. It's not just the technology that gets developed for the program. In my mind, maybe the greatest thing to come out of the program is the motivation we've given to young people to get a good education.
Yeah.
And that's gone too. I mean, astronauts are kind of in a special place in this country, and the kids look up to them. And I tell you, I talk to kids all the time. I mean, every time I go out, and it's very obvious that they are so in love with the space program that they really work hard in school to get good grades, because eventually they might be able to get in the space program. And when you take the space program away, now what are they going to do?
Right.
Welcome to Talkin' Tunes 2020.
A few years ago, I got a chance to follow around astronaut commander of the Apollo 15, Al Warden. And he had a few interviews, one from John Van Wyck and one from Andy O'Reilly, Pam Roberts, and Mark Dixon. So there you go, going back a few years there. But some great interviews, and found out a lot of wonderful things about astronaut Apollo 15, Al Warden, and some of the things that he has talked about, and about his book that he wrote. He was going around doing a book signing all over town, all over Muskegon, and talk about why he became an astronaut and what he did. So here you go, interview with Al Warden, Apollo 15 commander of the Apollo 15. Talking Tunes.
What's your
More about what happened after.
right?
I mean,
What
the
about-
important part is
What about Mike Collins? Good guy,
the best.
is he?
He's my hero.
He stole that show on In the Shadow of the Moon. He ran away with that whole video.
Mike
What a
Collins-
character!
Well, I'm going to tell you, he is probably the most competent, nice, friendly guy. He was my role model.
Yeah.
In fact, Mike helped me get in the program.
Did he really?
Oh yeah.
Did these guys ever come and see you?
I see your photo montage turned out pretty good.
No, because I never invited.
Which one?
No.
Those pictures I helped
Oh,
you
I
with
see them
at
all.
the library?
Right.
Oh yeah, I see him a couple times a year.
Do you
We all
really?
get together, so
Yeah.
I see him. But Mike lives down in Florida. He's in Marco Island,
Yeah, I thought,
and he goes out fishing every day.
thought that one
He's
that
completely out.
was done by
Do you think Gus Grissom would have been the first guy on the moon had that fire not happened?
I don't think so.
No.
I don't think they would have recycled him. See, the attitude back in those days was that if you're in the program, you're capable of flying. So yeah, he had the most. His job was the most critical of all because he's going to fly the first one.
Yep.
It ended up Wally doing it, but Gus flew the first Gemini,
Yep.
and he flew the first. Going to fly the first Apollo. He flew the second Mercury, people made a lot of noise about him losing the spacecraft on his, when it landed
When it
because
went
of the
in water,
hatch.
yeah, but that wasn't his fault.
And and that's what the media does. They pick up on something like that, and they just absolutely persecuted the guy. And I have a tendency to believe that there was something wrong with the spacecraft because Gus was a out and out 10,000% test pilot. He would not do something just haphazardly. He was very keen, and I believe that because of the kind of guy he was and the test pilot that he was, that's why he was the first guy on Gemini, the first guy on Apollo.
Who's the biggest hotshot of the bunch? Cowboy, just balls to the wall. Let's go.
Pete Conrad.
Pete Conrad?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
See, I would have bet Gene Cernan.
Oh, no.
He just seems like everything I've seen him in and all that. He's got that twinkle in his eye, and he looks like.
Well, he does, but Pete Conrad really helped.
Did he?
Yeah. He was the guy that everybody wanted.
Yeah.
He was Apollo 12.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember in 60.
Pete was just a wonderful guy, and he was full of stories. Laughed all the time. Everything was funny.
Alan Bean loves him. I mean, Alan Bean wouldn't have been on that flight if it wasn't for Pete Conrad, right?
Well, Pete picked Dick Gordon and Al Bean on that flight. Yeah. And, it was an all Navy crew, and they were like three peas in a pod.
He's a character, Alan Bean.
Alan Bean.
The videos I've seen of him.
What a fantastic artist.
Oh yeah, I've seen some. I couldn't afford any of his art, but
Well, I never could. Well, he's his paintings now. I bet you. My guess is if you wanted to buy a painting, an original, where there are no copies.
Yep, $30,000.
No.
No?
How about 100?
No.
Oh yeah, I would think $100,000 now today.
No kidding. You want this seat?
Can I turn the lights down a little bit?
You can do whatever you want, yeah.
You don't ever. I don't have to talk to you. I just want a hug.
Okay.
Woo, look at that.
Wow.
Pays to be a
That's
space
something
cowboy,
you can't
doesn't
Thank
it?
you. You have an awesome website too. I wanted to go lwarden.com.
I've been there.
Have you? It's a neat site. I just put it up on my Facebook. Sit next to you and holy cow.
Well, you're the only one in this room that got the hug.
Yeah.
That's right. I got the hug.
I see why you wanted to hug her.
I feel totally honored.
I don't hug guys.
Made all the
Never
money.
have. Never have.
I just want you two to know it made all the money that I spent on the girls worthwhile. today.
Pam, I think's got the right stuff.
That's right. That's right. Right there. Made it worth it all.
She was born with it.
No, not those. Those are new.
No, actually, I bought them.
Okay.
That's okay. It's money well spent. You know what? I think Mark and I both agreed several weeks ago when we found out that you were going to be coming in that this guy, to my and your right, is such a space fanatic. He has just studied and read and collected so much that we're going to take a back seat.
To be honest with you, I think he knows more about it than I do.
He might.
Yeah.
We're going to take a back seat and turn it over to
Andy's not
Andy.
going to be able to get out of the studio. His head's going to be so big.
Oh my gosh.
And in all honesty, as I led up to this and that and the other thing, I was glad you came into the morning show a little bit this morning and talked about some of the stuff because I didn't know how far to push some of these questions with you. And you don't know what you're going to get when an astronaut comes in because let's be honest, astronauts, as much as they look like cowboys in the press and as much as they've got that gung-ho attitude about space flight and the risk and the danger and all that kind of stuff, these are remarkably educated, overly educated people that some of them may not have the personality that Al Warden walked in here with. And I was so relieved. I'm
What
like, hey, good,
personality
this is
did
just
you
another
walk
guy.
in?
Just another guy.
Exactly right.
And that's
Just another guy.
just
Grew
incredible.
up on a farm.
Right here in
Yeah.
Jackson, Michigan.
Yeah, Jackson. I bounced back and forth between Jackson and East Jordan.
Yep.
My grandfather was a homesteader up there. He
Yep.
came down from Canada before the last century and staked out 160 acres and built a farm. And he spent his whole life, poor guy, with a team of horses, taking all the stones out of the out of the fields. But that's my background. It's on a farm. The farm we had in Jackson, basically I was the only one who worked the farm from the time I was 12 on. I got my first driver's license the day I turned 14.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, you could do that back then if you lived on a farm. And so I was pretty independent. I've earned my own way since I was 12 years old.
When was your first flight?
My first flight was in 1951 when I took a commercial flight to New York to go to West Point.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You've
And
never been on a plane?
Never,
till then?
nope. And I never really had any ideas that flying was a good thing for me. I went to West Point with the idea that I was going to be the guy leading in charge of San Juan Hill.
Yep.
With 5,000 Marines or
Mhm.
Army guys behind me.
Mhm.
But as I went through West Point, I had a couple of tactical officers who were Air Force. And one of them was really kind of interesting. He was the quarterback behind Blanchard and Davis. Anybody remember the name?
Nope.
Arnold Tucker.
I'm stoned.
And he was a little bitty short guy. He was only about 5'6", something like that. But he was the quarterback on the Army team when Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis were playing.
Oh, wow.
And he was also an All-American back then. Anyway, he went in the Air Force, and he was one of my tactical officers. And the other one was a guy he was a captain in the Air Force at the time, who eventually ended up as a commander-in-chief of SHAEF, and then he became a superintendent of the Air Force Academy. So these are pretty outstanding guys, both of them. And they got to working on me to go into the Air Force, and I got intrigued with that, and decided, well, why not? You know, I thought promotions would be a lot better in the Air Force because the Air Force was growing at the time. Turned out that was exactly the opposite. The Army started their own aviation program, and those guys got promoted a lot faster than we did.
Really?
But that's what got me in the Air Force and started flying. And once I started flying, I realized that, hey, this is pretty cool stuff.
And
I can do this.
you were in the test pilot corps.
Well, yeah, after a few years of flying in the Air Force, I was in a all-weather fighter squadron in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And I spent about 6 years there. And then during that 6 years, I spent a lot of time in the hangar. I rebuilt a couple of cars when I was a kid, and I'm into the technical, mechanical stuff. So I'm out in the hangar hanging around with all the technicians that were repairing our airplanes. And one day the squadron commander came to me and he said, I see you have this real interest over there in the hangar. I'd like you to take over the armament electronics section and run it. The guy who was running it hadn't been doing a very good job. So I did that, and in the course of doing that, the very first thing I did was I completely rebuilt the electronics shop because they were living like shade tree mechanics out there, and the shop was dirty and stuff was scattered around. So we got together with the companies that built the airplane, General Dynamics and Hughes Aircraft, and they bought the materials, and we completely redid the shop. We air conditioned it. We put in fluorescent lighting, soundproofing in the ceiling, put tile floors all the way through, rebuilt all the workbenches, put all the stuff where it's supposed to be. Everything had a place. What was surprising about that was that once we got that done, we got organized in a clean environment, and we had clear line of authority, chain of command. Our in commission rate doubled. We went from about 30% in commission, 40%, maybe up to about 90% in commission. And Air Defense Command started looking at that and saying, you've got a secret here. You've done something that we really need to get other squadrons to do. So we'd like you to come to headquarters. And I'm thinking, oh, geez. Go to headquarters and fly a desk? No, I don't think so. I was in Washington, D.C., so I got in my car and I ran over to the Pentagon one day. And I grabbed hold of the senior master sergeant who was responsible for Civilian Institute program, which was the Air Force's program to put guys back in college. And I said, help. I need you to help me. And so we talked about it a little bit, and 2 weeks later I got orders to go back to the University of Michigan. So that's how I got back there.
No kidding.
What kind of planes did you fly when you were a test pilot? I mean, did you ever jump in the X-15, or was
no.
That was already.
I was teaching in the test pilot school.
Okay.
I had never really actually got into flight test because NASA picked me up before I could do that.
Right.
But yeah, we flew F-104s and T-38s, and we had a whole bunch of airplanes out there, B-25s.
So how did you make the jump to NASA then?
Well, I was teaching at the test pilot school, and you consider that I had lots of flying time. I was a qualified test pilot. In fact, I was teaching in a test pilot school. I had lots of flying time. I was under the age limit, and NASA had a request for applicants. And I just kind of threw my name in, just see what would happen, and lo and behold, I got in. But it's like anything, though. If you apply for a job, you look at the basic requirements, and you see, oh my God, there are 1,000 people that are qualified, under the basic rules. And in my case, there were over 800 that were basically qualified to, with the minimum requirements. And they whittled that down to 19 of us because instead of a bachelor's degree and 1,000 hours of flying time, under 35 and under 6 feet tall. Those are the basic requirements. You can pass a physical. There are lots and lots of people qualified, but what they picked was double master's degree, 4,000 to 5,000 hours of flying time, test pilot, under 6 feet and under 35. I mean,
Their criteria
we had-
a little bit.
well, when you look at 800 people, you're going to pick the 19 at the top, and they're going to be the ones with all the background.
What about some of the people that were as equally qualified as you that didn't make it? I mean, because there
There weren't any.
No?
No.
Well, of course not.
No.
What a dumb question.
You said equally qualified?
But you know what
No.
I mean? There were people, and you know, from the things I've read and the things I've watched over the years, there were people that didn't get picked, and a lot of people don't know why. They don't really understand why. Like, say you were picked over this guy or that guy or anything like that. What would you?
Let me tell you. Let me go through the selection cycle with you. 830 applied.
Yep.
Paperwork analysis of all 830. Whittle that down to 75.
Yep.
Okay. These are the 75 on paper with all your efficiency reports and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The 75 were then sent down to San Antonio to take physicals. And that physical was really something. It was 10 days long. I mean, that was.
Oh, not just
That
12
was.
hours?
Oh,
Yeah, not just turn your head and cough.
That was. They checked.
They check everything.
Well, they checked everything.
Yeah.
For instance, they put a pin in my shoulder and a pin in my wrist, and they would measure how quickly a signal went from my wrist to my shoulder.
I've had
This
that
is the
done.
kind of stuff, really,
I've had
through the
that
nerves.
test on my
Yeah,
foot.
Yeah.
Yep.
that kind of stuff. Put your foot in a bucket of cold water and then start recording your pulse rate. Just lots of
You had
stuff
to
like
pass
that. Yeah. Well, I don't think they really had any pass or fail kind of stuff.
They just wanted to know
They just-
where you fell.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
As an example, we did 3 days of psychological testing. That was crazy.
Yeah.
We had a psychiatrist who was a colonel in the Air Force. And we took all these tests, the Rorschach test, and then this, the Wasserman test, and then that test, and that. Famous story about that. One of the tests was the psychiatrist sits across from me, and he's got these 8x11 sheets, and he starts showing you, and the Rorschach's, the
Sure,
inkblot stuff.
sure,
Well,
yeah.
the other one was a series of pictures of various things, if you've ever done that or not. Yes, and they're dreary. It's like you see a picture of a mountain on each side, and a big valley in between, and a bridge over it, and some people going across the bridge. You got to describe what's going on. Famous story about Pete Conrad. The last one is a blank white sheet. And the doc says, "Pete, what do you see in the picture?" He says, "Well, I can't really make it out because you got it upside down." So, but I asked the psychiatrist on our out briefing. I asked the psychiatrist, what good is this psychological testing? He said, "Can you knock anybody out?" And he said, "No, not really." He said, "We can make some recommendations, but we really don't decide who stays and who goes unless we find somebody that's clinically insane."
Yeah.
And then they can do something about it. But outside of that, and that's kind of the way the physical is too. It's not that there's a minimum that you got to pass in the physical. It's that they look at everything and you pass or
Outside
fail.
the norm.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they're
yeah.
setting
You pass
high
or fail.
lows.
Right.
Does that?
So
Keep it all in the
then,
middle.
once we did that whittled the group down to 50. Then the 50 went to Houston, and we did written and oral exams in front of the selection committee. And Mike Collins was on the committee.
Yep.
And Mike was kind of my standard bearer.
Yeah,
down
for
there.
people who don't
He
know,
helped me.
Mike Collins was the first guy at your job when
Yeah, he was
Apollo 11 went to
a
the moon.
command module pilot on Apollo 11. Right?
Yep.
A great guy, and he's the guy who built the Air and Space Museum in Washington. So it took 5 years for me to get in. Now I got to say, there were 19 in my group that were selected. I was one of the first to get assigned to a flight. Stu Russo, let's see, Fred Hayes, Jack Swigert, Stu Russo, Ed Mitchell, and I, and Jim Irwin. We're the first 6 out of the 19 to get picked for flights. I would have been on an earlier flight, except they had to switch out Apollo 8 and Apollo 9. Apollo 8 was supposed to be the first lunar module checkout.
Yep.
And the lunar module wasn't ready in time, so they sent Apollo 8 to the moon. And then Apollo 9 became that one, so we slipped back a flight. But it took about 5 years. Now, the 6 of us that made those first few flights, there were guys in my group that didn't make a flight for 21 years.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah. Bruce Mccandless didn't make a flight until in the 80s.
Yeah, but Bruce Mccandless had a lot to do off the scene. He wasn't he the Capcom for quite a few of those flights.
Oh yeah, like well, if you're not flying, you're Capcom.
Yeah,
you got to be. I mean that's what you do.
Yeah, and how old was Mccandless when he went up to repair the Hubble? I mean, he was pushing. He had to be in his 60s.
I don't know. I
No?
don't know. But yeah, Bruce is a good guy. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
It's just that there were some guys that got assigned to flights and some didn't for various reasons.
Yep.
You can say the same thing about getting selected for flight as you say about getting selected into the program.
Sure.
Just
Who
is what
knows?
it is.
Who knows? I will tell you that the 19 of us went through about a 1-year training program, classroom training, and flying, and a bunch of stuff. At the end of that period, we were told to evaluate the other 18, from 1 through 18.
Oh boy.
Okay, that's how you do it. And all 19 of us did that, and then Deke Slayton, our boss, put all those numbers together and added them all up, and he came out with a list from 1 through 19 of order of flight. That's how we
Based on your peers.
So
Yeah.
I guess if I had one question to ask, it's probably been asked at least 1,000 times, if not more. And it'll be asked more times today as you go out and about and do your book signings, by the way. Of all the experiences that you've had in your life, was this by far one of the great ones that you would never trade for anything? Or, I mean,
Yeah,
honestly,
no,
I
it was
guess
a good-
that's what
it was a wonderful
just looking
experience.
At it, I would
Yeah.
think there's nothing greater. My guys, how do
Well-
you top this? Does the birth of a child top that? Does holding your grandkids for the first time top that?
That's a tough one. My simile for all this is a football team. We go watch a football team on Saturday for 3 hours playing football, and they're on national television. They got on clean uniforms, and they look great, and they play great. We never see the 5 days that they spent killing themselves getting ready for that game. Space is the same way. People don't understand the 3 years of 70-hour weeks that I put in training for that flight. And when you make the flight, you kind of do it, and it's great, but your mind is into what you're doing, and it's not into thinking about where you are and what that comes after.
You've been so
That
well
comes
trained.
after. Well, self-trained, yeah, sure. And I think we're all that way.
So in hindsight, was it as awesome as I hoped it was?
It was a pretty spectacular thing to do, but I got to tell you that there are other things that are just as exciting. See, the thing about a space flight is that that's a skill that you learn. That doesn't require a lot of original thinking. You follow a flight plan. You follow a procedure. Just like driving a car, just like flying an airplane, same thing. So there's not a lot of intellectual energy that goes into a space flight, but there are lots of other things in the world that require a lot of intellectual energy. Back in the 80s, I ran for Congress. That was a huge intellectual effort on my part because I had to talk to lots of various people. Some people want to go back on the gold standard. Other people want to give everything away, and you have to learn how to deal with all those things. I thought that was a tremendous intellectual challenge. Spaceflight was to an extent, but it was more of a skill that you learned. It's like flying an airplane.
Sir, we got to take a break. Can you stick around? Because we're finding this fascinating.
Sure.
We want to actually talk about why you're here, about the book and some signings and such. And we're talking spaceflight. We're talking a book called Falling to Earth. Why did you call it like Fly Me to the Moon or something like that? Because you were the guy that flew them to the moon.
Title's already taken.
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
probably.
Copyright.
Falling to Earth seemed an appropriate title for two reasons. One is that that's actually what we did at the end of the flight was fell back to Earth.
Oh, yeah.
Earth's gravity grabbed us, and we're falling back. I mean, it's just like dropping a rock off a cliff. So that's part of falling to Earth. The other part was what happened after the flight when we took a big hit.
Big hit.
Because of the postal cover.
Talk a little bit about the postal covers now. A postal cover is what?
Postal cover is an envelope that's stamped on a certain day and signed by the people involved. It commemorates something. Mm-hmm. And the postal covers we had on the flight were we had our crew patch cachet on it, a stamp on it, and they were postmarked the day of launch and the day of recovery on the USS Okinawa. And then the three of us signed them, and they become collector's items.
Yeah.
And they become quite valuable, as a matter of fact. So we got. I don't like to point the finger at Dave Scott, but he's the guy who got us into it.
Sure.
Because he'd been on a couple flights before. He was the old salt. He knew what was going on. And he told us that, hey, don't worry about it. Everybody's done it before. So, we're clean. Well, we did. We weren't. We got caught, and I got fired. Jim Irwin retired, and for some reason they left Dave in Houston, and I've never figured that out. But through all of that, the media really jumped on us. I mean, they were harsh.
And that was way back before the media really started jumping on people.
Well,
so
it was mostly newspaper back then.
Yeah,
Andy.
yeah.
There was a reporter for the Washington Post. His name was Tommy O'Toole, who I thought was kind of a friend before the flight, but when the poster cover thing came out, he was the harshest critic, and he really jumped on us. I mean, it was really, really bad in his. They never found that we did anything wrong, so
Right.
all this bad
just
mouth stuff was really
You
bad.
just didn't clear it ahead of time.
What was the criticism? What was so bad about this?
Well, we were gonna commercialize something
okay.
good in space. When I finally sued the government, got my covers back, I'll never forget going down to a little pub down the street from the archives, and Dave Scott and Jim Rohn were there, and we divvied up all the ones went back where they're supposed to. Tommy O'Toole walked in the front of the restaurant.
Kick his ass?
I said, hey Tommy, I raised my hand. Timmy, come on over here. And I showed him all the covers, and I said, here, Tommy, all that stuff that you wrote about before, the government gave us back our covers because we hadn't done anything wrong. He did write an article, but it showed up on page 19.
Naturally.
And that's what happens.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's why, yeah. Be a little careful.
So that was kind of that was a huge personal hit to you guys. And it was done more to set an example.
It
if I'm not
was.
mistaken.
If you look at any auction site today that sells space memorabilia,
Mm-hmm.
you'll see all kinds of postal covers, commemorative covers carried on flights before ours. And they're all on sale. If you wanted to buy, as an example, an Apollo 11 commemorative cover today, you're looking at probably $40,000.
Wow.
They are very, very valuable today. If I had any to sell, they'd be worth about $10,000.
Is that
So,
right?
yeah, they're pretty valuable. But the point is that lots of people had carried them before us. It's just that ours kind of got public, and NASA and the Senate committee decided to make an example of it. So we got nailed.
But again, you didn't have a clue because it had already been all right before.
Well, before this all came out, we didn't have a clue. We found out fast enough that NASA didn't think it was the right thing. As a matter of fact, they had the Justice Department investigate us to see what rules we broke.
See, but
They wanted to catch us violating some law somewhere, and they couldn't do it.
But
because we didn't.
here's the thing that Al hasn't touched on in this whole thing. These guys were making about $800 a month
Oh yeah.
as a salary. They've got kids, they've got wives, they've got car payments to make, they got all this kind of stuff.
Everything with the rest
And you
of
know
the
what?
Yeah.
Even back then, $800 a month wasn't all that much money. I don't blame them a bit for trying to figure out a way to take care of their families.
Well,
and
that's
if
what
it
it
had
was all
been-
about. And as a matter of fact, we didn't even have any insurance for the flight.
You had no insurance when you got on that rocket?
No.
Oh my God.
And not just my regular Air Force,
Right.
$10,000 or whatever it is. But that reminds me, people think we made a lot of money back then. I made $830 a month, and that included my flight pay. And I think a lot of people thought we made a lot of money for making the flights. Well, we did make some money on the flight, but it was called travel pay. Now, this is really weird. Make out a travel voucher. You've probably all done it. First one is transportation, that's government furnished. Next is lodging, that's government furnished. The next is meals, that's government furnished. There's only one other thing left, that's incidental expenses. So I got $3 a day for making that flight.
To the moon.
Yeah, incidental expenses. And that's money you spend on the trip, right?
Yeah, like
You get a heart when you get to the moon.
go
vending machine.
to a Burger King or something and order
Yeah.
lunch.
Okay.
Who they thought we'd see up there, but that's what I got $39 to make.
Here I thought you get paid by the mile or something.
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, I was hoping. Oh man, if they had frequent flyer miles back then, I would jumped on that with all 4
You'd
feet.
still be burning them off.
Yeah, I would. I'd be flying first class everywhere. I'll tell you
No
that.
kidding.
Talk about this a little bit, Al. When you were up there, you were the first astronaut to make a deep space EVA.
Right.
You got out of the vehicle
Hmm?
as it was going 17,500 miles an hour. No?
No, we weren't going that fast.
No?
We came out of lunar orbit at about 8,000 miles an hour, and 50,000 miles out, we're probably down to maybe 5.
Still.
See, we're escaping the lunar gravity, so we're slowing down as we go out. And then you get to a point about 2/3 of the way out between the Earth and the Moon, where the gravity is equal between the Earth and the Moon. And from that point on, now you're a falling rock coming back to Earth.
Yep.
Okay, so you end up at 25,000 miles an hour when you come back in the atmosphere. 17.5 is orbital.
Okay,
velocity.
all right.
It takes 25,000 miles an hour to get to the Moon, which is kind of a funny thing. People say, "Oh man, how'd you do that? I mean, you go so fast. I mean, my God, couldn't you feel it or something?" I say, "No.
You're in a vacuum out there.
Well, yeah, you're in a vacuum. You don't know it. I mean, there's no wind going by." I tell people, the big thing is there's nothing go by the window.
Yeah.
There aren't any trees, there aren't any roads, there's nothing out there. You don't have a clue. So, yeah, 25 kilometers.
Did you have some fear when you were
Not really.
between the Earth and the Moon?
Not really.
No?
We had practiced that a lot. And it was just kind of going through the numbers. I mean, you go step 1, step 2, step 3, and pretty soon, the hatch is open, you're out there, and you're walking hand over hand, you grab a film canister, bring it back in, go out and get another one, bring it back in, went out a third time, put my feet in some foot restraints, and stood up on the outside of the spacecraft, looked around. So I could see both the Earth and the Moon.
I would give everything up for that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really would. I would.
Well, you're pretty busy at the time, Andy.
I'm sure.
So, you think about it afterwards. It's like going to a great movie. When the movie's all over, it's when you start rethinking what the movie was all about and some of the great scenes. Well, it's kind of the same way. You don't think about it much when you're there, but when you get back, you got to focus.
Does it change your outlook on Earth and life on Earth?
Oh, I would say to some extent. You kind of say to yourself, "Hey, the Earth is." We never saw the Earth as a small object in the sky till we went to the Moon. And when you look at the Earth from out there and you say, "I can't believe we got all these problems going on here." I mean, we all depend on each other. It's like us guys in the spacecraft, like the three of us. We depend on each other to stay alive. And down here on Earth, if we just all get our act together and say, "Hey, we got a common goal, and that's to keep the Earth going as long as we can,"
Right.
That would become an overriding goal to everything else. And forget the religion, forget the parochial, forget the political, all that kind of stuff. If we just got together and worked out some of these problems, maybe we could stay here a little bit longer.
Yeah.
As it is, the Earth's got another 5 billion years to go before the sun burns out. I think long, long before that, we're going to destroy each other here on Earth. There won't be anything left.
What are your thoughts on some of the prospective end games that we could find? I mean, the fact that a comet could hit the Earth, the fact that and it has. I mean, you look at what wiped out the dinosaurs. It hit right there in the Gulf of Mexico, and that did them in. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, are the right steps being taken to try and prevent that happening again, if it did?
Oh, there's a lot of talk. I don't know if there are any steps.
Yeah.
What do? I mean, first off, you got to identify one, and then you got to figure out its trajectory, and you got to figure out that it's actually going to hit the Earth. These are really, really tough things to figure out. We've survived for 5 billion years so far. Maybe we can survive a few more.
Don't you just get like Bruce Willis to go out there and
I was
blow the
gonna
thing up?
say,
Exactly.
you wouldn't call Bruce Willis
exactly. He'd be the perfect guy to do
Get
it.
him to go and do it. He'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Once he drills so deep, we'll get down there. But
None of those movies are real, are they? They're just not, are they?
kidding.
I mean, do you ever
Right.
watch movies like that, Space Cowboys and whatnot?
Oh, I love Space Cowboys.
What a load of crap.
That's a great movie.
See, because that right there happens to be my favorite.
Oh.
My very favorite.
Yeah, well, forget about launching yourself off to die on the moon. I mean, that's, I just love the one scene in there where they're in the front hallway of the administration building down in Houston. And they're standing there in the hallway talking, and right over Clint Eastwood's shoulder is a huge Apollo 15 patch. So you check that out the next time you see it.
It'll mean more next time. I
it's there.
guarantee. I wonder though if going back and watching that movie, if all the crap that they go through and all of the inside BS doesn't kind of hit home.
Oh, that movie is so far out there in terms of realistic story that it's just, it's just something to laugh at.
But
You
enjoy
take
it.
guys in their 70s and you run them through a 2-week training program. They're going to fly the shuttle? Come on. Jeez.
Nobody else knew what they knew. Come on.
Yeah, but
Nobody
they
else
didn't know
knows
anything
what
about
you
the shuttle. All they knew about was the electronics that were in that satellite up there. They didn't know anything about the shuttle.
So
And Donald Sutherland with his big glasses.
those were good.
Now, one of the questions before we let you go, because we got to get on again to the reason why you're here.
That's right.
But the question I've been wanting to know
signings.
for a long time on re-entry, does it get really hot in the capsule?
No.
It doesn't. Okay.
Our temperature inside the capsule went up 1 degree.
Really?
And that was only after we got on the ocean. We splashed down on the ocean, and the heat sink coming through the structure finally raised the temperature about 1 degree.
Because you
Outside
see
that,
like
you don't feel it.
you know,
That thing
falling
was really
through
well-
fire and everything.
Oh
It's
no,
like,
that was really, really well insulated. Yeah.
So you have two choices: splash down in the ocean in the module in the capsule, or come in on the shuttle, the way many other astronauts
Landing like a
have.
plane.
Yeah, landing it like a plane. What's your choice? Which one would you rather take?
I think the shuttle would be fun to land. Coming down in a parachute, you're just at the mercy of a parachute. The thing about the shuttle is the pilot gets a chance to fly it, and so he gets it back. Now, that kind of begs the question, would I rather fly an Apollo or a shuttle? And the answer is absolutely, unequivocally, Apollo.
really?
I do not like the shuttle. I never liked the shuttle. I think it's always been an unsafe machine, and I'm glad I wasn't in it.
Any thoughts on where the program's going to go from here on out now?
Well, give NASA another 10 years, and they'll probably have it figured out. But right now, they don't know what the hell they're doing.
Andy, did you ask your biggest question
Which one?
off the air? Did you ask? Have we been there?
Oh, I hit him up on the air.
And
He said no.
we haven't been to the Red Planet.
I think other than I don't know.
think so.
He says no, so I'll take him for his word for it.
Mhm.
And he, Al explained to me too earlier this morning. He explained to me that NASA doesn't really have any secrets.
They don't.
Wow.
They don't.
I would have thought there
Well-
would have been a ton of them.
I
Well,
would think so
let
too.
me say this: going to Mars and back is a 1.5-year program.
Yep.
There's no way you'd get away with that without somebody knowing about it.
Yep.
Things have really gotten soft
Yeah.
in a program. I mean, you got all kinds of entertainment devices up there now. We didn't have any of that.
No.
We were very crude in what we did.
So how many years have gone into the writing of this book?
Well, 40 years of memories and about 3 years of actually putting it down on paper.
Was it a joy? Was it cathartic?
It's cathartic, yeah, and it's kind of fun, and I'm really pleased with the reception it's getting.
Would you like to sign a dozen copies or so?
Oh, I'd
Pam's
love
thinking
to.
eBay.
Maybe add some
Love to.
zeros to it. You're not going to get in trouble for signing your own book, right? It's gonna be
No,
okay.
that's what I'm here for.
Lord.
How long's it been out?
Came out publicly released on July 29th.
And being pretty well received, I understand.
It's already in second printing.
Dynamite.
They're very excited at the Smithsonian, who is the publisher. Random House did the printing, and between the Smithsonian and Random House, they're taking care of chains like Barnes & Noble, where I'll be today.
From?
Yeah,
Do
what
we have the
time?
hours?
10:30 to 1.
Okay.
We'll be over at Barnes & Noble, and we'll be over at Hot Rod Harley's later on.
And I'll tell you what, if I can get out of the hospital early enough, which I have my fingers crossed on, I'm going to ride my Harley over to
Oh.
Hot Rod, and I would love to get a picture of you on my bike. It would be
Oh.
an honor.
If it's standing still, yeah.
It's a 105th anniversary edition deluxe, and
Oh,
you
wow.
would look awesome on that
Wow.
bike. What a memory that would be.
I don't ride motorcycles, so anything like
I'll
that.
park it. All you have to do
Yeah,
is sit
okay.
and look
All right.
at it.
Never mind those motorcycles. Let's get on 5 million pounds of explosive and go up to the moon.
There you go.
Yeah,
What a
yeah.
mix.
Never mind the risk factor.
Yeah, well, we didn't have much risk factor. We were pretty good shape back then.
Well, guys, in the length of time we've been doing the Lake Effect, this has been our biggest honor, I'm
This
sure.
is
I know
22
it's
years
been
of
for you
radio.
guys.
I mean,
Like,
for me,
wow.
I'm speechless.